who was like this woman at 32, but wasn't the same way or worse at 22. Not saying it's impossible, it's just very rare. Human beings don't work that way generally. So why do some men end up with horrible women? Well, because in most cases, they choose to marry horrible women. Why would a man make that choice? Not hard to understand. She's attractive, he's lonely, she's giving him attention. He overlooks all the red flags. That's like all there is to it most of the time. It's understandable on a human level, but it's a bad choice. And my solution for young single guys is that they shouldn't make that kind of choice. Don't marry a woman like that. And despite what you may have heard, they're not all like that. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling you despair and failure. And those people, along with this woman in the video, and any woman like her, are all today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
Hey there, I'm Daily Wire Executive Editor John Bickley.
And I'm Georgia Howe, and we're the hosts of Morning Wire.
We bring you all the news you need to know in 15 minutes or less.
Watch and listen to Morning Wire 7 days a week, everywhere you get your podcasts.
Alrighty, folks, stacked show for you here today. New polls show Democrats in serious trouble. Americans just do not like them. We discuss also the young people. Is everything copacetic with them? Because there's some new poll data on the youngsters. It's not amazing. Plus, all your Epstein updates, Gaza updates, everything else. First, there are 36 days until my new book, Lions and Scavengers, hits shelves September 2nd. It's the most important book I've ever written. It's easily the most passionate. I break down the fight for Western civilization between the lions who build civilization and the scavengers who tear it down in the name of grievance, envy, and power. It's the product of 4 years of work. I can't wait for you to read it. If you care about truth, merit, and all the things at stake, go to dailywire.com/Ben and pre-order today. You'll see all the options there. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, even a signed copy from the Daily Wire shop. Pre-order your copy today at dailywire.com/Ben. Well, folks, if you pay attention to the legacy media, President Trump is in serious trouble. The only things happening in the world are the Epstein case and what's going on in the Gaza Strip and all the rest. And we'll get to those topics in just a little while on the show. But here's the thing. Because the legacy media are aligned with the Democratic Party, they would like you to ignore the fact that the Democratic Party has literally never been less popular. And some of that has to do with the maintained popularity of President Trump. If President Trump were wildly unpopular, then the way that politics goes, it's a seesaw. If Trump goes down, Democrats can go up. And so if Democrats are down, that means by necessity, President Trump remains up. And the Democrats continue to be unbelievably weak. According to Politico, President Trump's approval rating remains underwater, but Democrats are faring much worse, according to a new poll from the Wall Street Journal released on Saturday. That new survey, conducted by Democratic pollster John Anzalone and Republican pollster Tony Fabrizio, found Democrats' popularity at its lowest point in 3 decades, in 30 years of polling for the Wall Street Journal, with 63% of voters holding an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party. Just 33% of voters hold a favorable view of Democrats. A meager 8% hold a very favorable opinion of Democrats. That means net negative favorability, 30 percentage points. So, whatever the media keep telling you about the unpopularity of Trump, Democrats remain way more unpopular. Now, that doesn't mean that President Trump isn't facing stiff headwinds, some of his own making. By 17 points, voters disapprove, for example, of President Trump's handling of tariffs. But they still trust Republicans on trade more than Democrats by 7 points. So here's the problem for the Democrats. People may not like certain aspects of what President Trump is doing, but they do trust that Trump is going to be responsive to reality in a way that Democrats simply are not. There are literally two policy issues where Democrats are favored over Republicans. Two. One is healthcare, and the other is vaccine policy. Okay, the president right now is negative 7 points. The GOP is negative 11. But remember, the Democrats are negative 30. Negative 30. Now, Democrat enthusiasm, because we're going into a midterm election next year, is higher than Republican enthusiasm. However, despite those poll numbers, Republicans are only down to Democrats in the generic congressional ballot by 3 points, which is basically a toss-up when that translates to individual congressional races. At this time in 2017, Democrats had an 8-point advantage already in the midterm elections. So, Democrats are in serious trouble, and the reason is because they are totally and completely out of touch. There's a fascinating piece from the New York Times titled Inside the Rise of the Multiracial Right, written by Daniel Martinez Hosang, a professor of American Studies and Political Science at Yale. And the whole piece is about the rightward drift of minority voters, about the fact that President Trump won a radically outsized share of minority voters, despite the fact that we have been told since basically 2008 that the Democratic Party was going to forge a brand new majority-minority coalition that left white voters in the dust. And actually, as it turns out, President Trump wins white voters, but he's also winning an outsized share of Latinos, blacks, Asian Americans. The question is why? And the answer is because the Democratic Party, as it took over all of America's institutions, disconnected itself from normal Americans. The Democratic Party made a couple of major mistakes. One of those is that it decided to implement an elite Ivy League agenda in terms of values at these institutions. That the only thing that mattered in the end was the most radical social values you could possibly imagine. Anti-church values, anti-family values. Yes, it turns out that the radical LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign wing of the Democratic Party alienated an awful lot of minorities, many of whom are still very much ensconced in church and family. And it turns out that if the price of moving along with the Democrats is that you have to believe boys can become girls, that is a major issue for a huge number of Americans. And yet Democrats seem preternaturally obsessed with that issue, unable to abandon that issue. And yes, that is a major obstacle for them. But there's another problem too, and that is that Democrats, because in the end, the elite of the Democratic Party remain upper crust white liberals and fellow travelers like Barack Obama, who again made common cause with those upper crust elite white liberals and felt very safe and comfortable in those particular circles. He talks about this in Dreams from My Father. Because of that, there was a tendency to believe that all minorities felt the same way. There's a flattening of all minority racial groups into one giant blob, quote unquote, people of color. And that's not the way anyone thinks of themselves. Nobody thinks of themselves that way. Hell, white voters don't even think of themselves that way. If you ask a normal white voter, that white voter could be of Polish extraction, of Italian extraction now, of Jewish extraction, of German extraction, of Irish extraction. And there's been an attempt in America to sort of flatten all of these distinctions out, but those distinctions are very real in terms of how people see themselves in terms of identity. So when you tell an Asian American that their interests are identical to those of a black American or black American, that his interests are identical to those of a Latino American, well, in some cases, the answer is yes, because we're all individuals. But in some cases, the answer is very much no. It may turn out, for example, that affirmative action policies that are designed to increase the number of applicants who are black who get into Ivy League colleges may cut directly against the interests of, say, Asian Americans who are outscoring their competitors on college tests. And so pretending that essentially the coalition of minority groups, they all agree on everything because they're all, quote unquote, people of color in opposition to white people, that is not a winning argument. This is the point of this piece. At the very end, Hosang writes, he's writing about a woman named Deja Davis, who attended America Fest, which is a Charlie Kirk Turning Point USA conference. He says, at America Fest, weeks before Mr. Trump began his second term, I met a 25-year-old black Blexit member named Deja Davis. Blexit is a movement originally started by Candace Owens to get black Americans to leave the Democratic Party. Committed and idealistic, she projected a strong sense of racial identity and pride. She told me she and the other black conservatives she works with care so deeply about our community. They were setting up chapters of conservative groups at historically black colleges and hosting community events. I believe the black community can do anything, she told me. When I began this work, says Hosang, it was difficult to imagine people of color, again, people of color, like Miss Davis, whose racial identity feels to her in no way out of line with her political one, becoming a major conservative political force in our country. Yet with thousands of voters like her at the Turning Point Conference, that's exactly where we are. For people like Miss Davis, optimism and hope for the future come from the right, not the left. Their racial identity is still at the core of their political beliefs, if anything. So much of what these voters have told me comes from a pointed concern for their communities. But their political decisions are driven more by the realities that racial communities face, collapsing social structures, economic uncertainties, and a sense that the status quo is untenable. So those institutions the Democrats took over and then used the legitimacy of those institutions to promulgate far leftism, it turns out people just lost trust in those institutions and have turned to a wrecking ball like President Trump. Says Jose, quote, absent a solution to these core problems, appealing to disaffected voters of color on their racial identity alone has rung hollow. Grappling with the complexities of their frustrations, anxieties, and hopes will determine the next political chapter of this country. All of which is, again, quite hopeful for Republicans, for sure. And some of this has to do, again, with the anti-institutional nature of President Trump. Chris Matthews used to be on MSNBC, comes back on. Hey, man, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is shockingly popular because he's actually quite a good politician.
He's very good at knowing your condition, your worries, your insecurities. I mean, he's a great bully on a great school, Catholic high school, a great school. I mean, he had the scariest bully. He knew everybody's weakness. But he's really good at the moment. I mean, he's out there watching television and keeping up. And, is this the right thing to do? What am I going to do right now? Biden couldn't do that in a million years. Not in a million years. Mondale couldn't do that. They don't have the connection to the electricity of what's going on in the country culturally. And he knows what works.
Not only does he know what works, President Trump has been the point of the spear in one of the things that Americans hate most, which is this belief that if you say something outside of the preserved sort of the Hillary Clinton left, you ought to be canceled. One of the effects of this has been a massive backlash, and President Trump is both a symptom and a cause of this backlash against political correctness, wokeness, and cancel culture. Now, I ought to define cancel culture here. Not everybody being criticized is cancel culture. Cancellation is when you lose a job or when you are removed from a platform, not for an opinion like you're pro-Nazi or something, from a platform or a job because you're outside the Overton window. The problem for the left is that the left decreased the so-called Overton window, the window of acceptable discourse, so narrow that virtually everybody ended up being in danger of cancellation. And President Trump fought back against that. He's wildly blown open the Overton window to mostly good effect, but some negative effect, which we'll get to in a minute. Well, one of the effects of that, of the ending of that Overton window dominance by the left, is that organizations that used to be quite powerful, like Media Matters, are now on the road. So Media Matters is a left-wing organization originally funded by Hillary Clinton acolytes in order to go after right-wing media companies. And what they would do is astroturf boycotts against people like Rush Limbaugh. So Rush Limbaugh would say something, Media Matters would get on the horn to its activists. Those activists would call up Rush Limbaugh's advertisers. Those advertisers, out of fear, would cancel on Rush Limbaugh. Rush would lose millions of dollars. Media Matters would declare victory. Media Matters, for a while in this country, was so powerful that I personally, along with Jeremy Boring, before we co-founded Daily Wire, we actually had an organization called Truth Revolt in order to fight back against Media Matters. And we said openly, we're going to go after left-wing media and use the exact same tactics as Media Matters. Not because we like those tactics, but because mutually assured destruction. The minute Media Matters stops doing it, we will stop doing it. And it turns out those tactics were in fact applicable against the left. We went after, for example, Alec Baldwin's advertisers when he was on MSNBC, and Martin Bashir's advertisers when he was on MSNBC, and Al Sharpton at the time. Okay, well now Media Matters, because we now live in the post-Overton window era, Media Matters is basically dead in the water. Fascinating article from the New York Times by Kenneth Vogel, Kate Conger, and Ryan Mack. Quote, Media Matters, a nonprofit group that has played a key role in liberal politics, is struggling to withstand months of legal assaults by President Trump's allies, offering a glimpse of what might be in store for even well-funded targets of his retribution campaigns. But it's not just about President Trump. The fact is, people don't want to give to organizations that are specifically dedicated at canceling mainstream public opinion. The organization, which is funded by some of the Democratic Party's biggest donors, has racked up $15 million in legal fees over the past 20 months to defend itself against lawsuits by Elon Musk, in addition to investigations by Mr. Trump's Federal Trade Commission and Republican state attorneys general. And again, many of those investigations are warranted considering the sort of collusive impact of Media Matters. The group has now slashed the size of its staff and scrambled to raise more cash from skittish donors, according to documents and interviews with 11 people familiar with the organization's fight to survive. That might not be enough. Media Matters tried to settle with Mr. Musk by offering concessions, but the sides were far apart and talks fizzled. Apparently, it has considered shutting, which would be very good for the country. Angelo Corazon, the president of Media Matters, said, quote, "Unlike some major media entities that have recently caved to pressure, we understand this battle is larger than us. That's why we continue to carry out our mission and fight in court." But again, this is a dramatic downturn for Media Matters because they were part of that censorious left that basically said anything outside of the purview of the Democratic Party was unacceptable discourse. Media Matters has originally funded by David Brock, who switched sides, became a left-wing radical enforcer for the Democratic Party. That's clearly what they were about. Media Matters is made up of two separate nonprofits registered under sections of the tax code, one for charities and the other for social welfare groups. Some major donors include people like George Soros, as well as Stephen F. Mandel Jr., a hedge fund manager, Susie Thompson Buell, clothing entrepreneur. So again, they are in serious trouble, and it couldn't happen to a group of nicer people. Seriously could not happen to a group of nicer people. In May, the FTC launched an investigation into whether Media Matters and roughly a dozen other watchdog and advertising groups illegally colluded to dissuade companies from buying ads on X, among other platforms. Again, this is a cause that Daily Wire has been leading literally since the first day we started getting involved in this particular cause. Like, since launch, this has been one of our chief causes. So, the era of the censorious left, the upper crust Harvard liberal who speaks down and patronizes to minorities and then shuts the Overton window so nobody can speak different. That day is ending. And Democrats don't know what to do about it. They're quite puzzled about what is the next step here. It seems that they just want to rage against the machine. Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post, he says the Democrats have to stand up and fight, but he's not providing a real playbook here.
Well, I think Democratic Party faithful, they know that that their leaders are in the minority, that there's not much that they can do. But wouldn't you're just going to sit there and just let this happen? We need you to stand up and fight, give voice to the fear and the anger and the frustration that's out there in the country, not just among Democrats, but just Americans who see this chipping away at democracy that they don't like. So you have to fight and stop. Don't worry about ticking someone off or hurting a certain constituency. In the end, it's about saving the country, saving our democracy, and then you can, put the pieces back together later.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck with that. I love that David Brooks is sitting next to him on PBS NewsHour, and this is just indicative of what the Democratic Party is. Upper crust, highly paid media members of all races who agree with each other that the number one priority in America is saving people like them. Here's David Brooks saying universities have to stand up and fight Trump.
The other option is a broad coalition, not only of all universities, but all law firms, businesses, nonprofit foundations, anybody in any sector that could be part of the extortion attempt. And they were band together, their strength in numbers. If they come for one of us, they come for all. Sort of a domestic NATO. Article 5.
Yeah, good luck. They come for one of us, they come for... If your party is Jonathan Capehart and David Brooks, you are in serious trouble. And so the Democratic Party is now turning to younger cadres. But the problem is that all the young socialists are also people who are spoiled brats. Typically, they are spoiled brats. The best example being this amazing article from the New York Post. Apparently, socialist New York City mayoral frontrunner Zoran Mamdani celebrated his recent nuptials with a lavish 3-day affair at his family's ritzy, secluded Ugandan compound, complete with masked security guards and a cell phone jamming system, according to the New York Post. The gates of the bustling private compound, which sits in the wealthy Buziga Hill area outside the capital city of Kampala, were heavily guarded by military-style masked men this week, with guests streaming in and partying until midnight, according to sources in the town who wish to remain anonymous for security reasons. Mamdani had eloped with artist and animator Rama Duwaji, 27, in February. He told his social media followers Sunday he was headed to his homeland to celebrate with his wealthy filmmaker mom and professor dad, who own that Buziga Hill property. Apparently, the neighborhood is home to some of Uganda's richest, including billionaire businessman Godfrey Kirumira, a city tycoon with stakes in real estate, tourism, petroleum, and infrastructure, and houses the neighboring Mamdani's easily fetch more than $1 million, which in Uganda, by the way, is like a lot of money. A $1 million home in the United States, can be like a mid-sized home depending on where you are. It could be a huge home depending on where you are. In Uganda, I promise you, that's going to be a really, really nice house, because the GDP per capita in Uganda is precisely $1,000 per capita. So $1 million will buy you half the country. I love you want to talk about limousine socialists?
It's scary.
That is what you're looking at. right now. Okay, so the Democratic Party is on the ropes. They are on the ropes, but there is an increasing danger. And that danger comes in the form of a splintering that is happening on the right. So part of the problem with the destruction of the institutions by the left is that there are, in fact, no replacements for the institutions. So there has been a split on the right between what Alana Newhouse, a tablet, has called the brokenness, people who believe the institutions need to be completely torn down, ripped to the ground, new institutions built, and people who believe the institutions are fixable. The area where the right generally agreed, however, is that institutions are necessary. One of the problems with the death of the legacy media, and believe me, I'm a big fan of the death of the legacy media since we run a major media company here at Daily Wire. But one of the things that's happened is that with distrust in institutions, justified, earned distrust in the institutions, that has been replaced by a variety of sources, some which are good and some which are bad. And unless people are trained in how to actually distinguish good sources from bad sources, they tend to intake an enormous amount of trash. And that's what's happened with younger Americans. So while I am quite optimistic about the future of the Republican Party, I am quite pessimistic about the nature of the quote-unquote younger generation. There's a very interesting article by a guy named John Puri over at National Review. He's a summer editorial intern at National. He's a young guy himself. He studies politics and history at Stanford. He goes through some of the poll numbers about Gen Z. He says there's an odd thing that many older liberals tend to say about America's youth. As a member of Generation Z, which currently comprises, let's say, 13 to 20, I've often heard a similar refrain. It's you young people who are going to save this country. Some older liberals say such things because they seem to truly believe that young Americans are an especially enlightened demographic, that we, purely by dint of our youth, have a better understanding of the world than does everyone else. Sometimes this assumption is translated into policy. He points out the UK saying that 16-year-olds should vote. However, he says, one small problem, Gen Z does not have some superior moral authority. We do not understand the world better than everyone else. Our political beliefs are not especially enlightened. Quite the opposite, in fact. The polling data reflect that we are largely morally and factually bankrupt. So, for example, he cites the moral perception of the recent war between Israel and Hamas. Apparently, according to a April 2024 Pew Research poll, Americans were asked whether Hamas's reasons for fighting Israel were valid. An overwhelming majority of Americans said no. But for those aged 18 to 29, 34% said Hamas's reasons were valid compared to 30% who thought otherwise. That age group was also the most likely to say that the way Hamas carried out its attack against Israel on October 7th, a giant terror attack, the worst attack on Jews since World War II, they said 9% said that it was valid, double the number of any other age group. A Harvard-Harris field survey after October 7th found similar results. Those 18 to 24 concluded by a majority, 51 to 49, that Hamas's massacre, quote, can be justified by the grievances of Palestinians. And it's not just that. When it comes to, for example, the killing of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, a poll of college students, Axios reported in January, found that half viewed the suspect extremely or somewhat favorably. Asked with whom they sympathized more, Mangione, the killer, or Brian Thompson, the victim, 45% said Mangione, 17% said Thompson. Nearly a quarter of Americans aged 18 to 24 say they trust Russian President Vladimir Putin over Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. That is the highest number by far in the age group. 52% of U.S. college students say it may be acceptable to block other students from attending a speech on campus. 68% approve of shouting down a speaker they disagree with. 32% say using violence is appropriate. Apparently, The Economist did a poll last year, and it found that 1 in 5 Americans aged 18 to 29 believe the Holocaust is a myth, and another 30% say they do not know whether the Holocaust is a myth, meaning like half of young Americans 18 to 29 either don't know whether the Holocaust is a myth or believe it is a myth. 28% said Jews wield too much power in America. Now, the question is, where is all this coming from? And the answer is, a lot of this is coming from crap social media accounts. It's coming from TikTok, it's coming from X. A huge amount of news that is intaken by young people is not coming from anything that looks like a vetted source or a source that actually cares about reality or veracity. In fact, 63% of Generation Z, quote, does not believe in moral absolutes, but thinks what is morally right or wrong depends on what an individual believes. So what is right changes over time based on society. Only 34% of Generation Z believe lying is morally wrong, which is lower than any other generation. Now, why do I point this out? Because if you want to know why conspiratorialism has soared, again, there are good reasons to distrust all these institutions. It is a good thing that people look at institutions hollowed out by the left wing with radical skepticism and look to build new institutions or restore those institutions by kicking the left out of those institutions and actually regaining credibility. However, if the substitute for this is an atomized society in which you go to TikTok for your information or x.com for your information, you're going to end up with some pretty bad information. And this is why conspiratorialism has soared on every side of the political aisle, and that is dangerous. Because conspiratorial nonsense, again, there are conspiracies. We've talked about many of them. Russiagate was an actual conspiracy. The media attempting to shut down the Hunter Biden laptop story, actual conspiracy. These are things that actually happen in real life. The thing about conspiracy, I've said 1,000 times on the show, is there's evidence of them. You can name the people involved. Conspiratorial thinking, however, speculates that there is an unnamed group of people who you can't put a finger on, but you know they're there, and behind closed doors they must be doing something nefarious and terrible, and therefore you are not in control of your own life, and you get to be very angry at somebody. Like, that sort of thinking is not good for society, it's not good politically, it's not good at all. It's bad for you as a human to engage in that sort of thinking, because it means that you are essentially saying that you are not in control of your own future, you're not in control of your own life, and there's no prospect that you will be, because the shadowy forces control everything. And so much of this is now being projected into what is going on the Jeffrey Epstein story. Now again, I will say it for the 1,000th time, people have a right to be angry about how the Jeffrey Epstein story was handled. Everyone believed, based on sort of the gestalt of the story, for literally a decade, people believed that Jeffrey Epstein was engaged in taping of and blackmail of very, very prominent figures by sex trafficking minors to them. That was the story. Okay, that's what everybody thought the story was. And that story was fomented by a lot of people in media who sort of picked up on a hint there or a clue there and put it all together and wrapped it up in a ball and then promoted the idea that certainly when we got access to the files, there would be something there. And that included the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. It did. It included Kash Patel at the FBI. It included a lot of people who were speculating. And again, speculating in the absence of evidence, I'm not anti that. If you want to ask questions in the absence of evidence, of course, you should. Skepticism is warranted. Once the evidence is made available, or once people you trust, the people who are asking those same questions, get access to the evidence, and they say, we looked, we tried, and we found there wasn't as much there wasn't what we thought was there. Once that happens, if you are still maintaining that same position, you have to call those people liars or complicit in all of this. And this is why President Trump is so annoyed. Because President Trump is like, listen, President Trump has humored pretty much all of the just asking questions that it's possible to humor in American life. President Trump is not somebody who's quashed conspiracy theorizing. President Trump is very much in favor of investigating all of those things. And yet President Trump is now being told that because his DOJ and FBI went through the evidence and came to a conclusion different than they thought they would come to, he now must be complicit, and now he has to answer all these Epstein questions, and so he's annoyed. And again, a lot of this is being fomented by those disparate sources of information and left-wing media. So there is a horseshoe that's happening right now. You have people inside the Republican Party from pseudo-MAGA who are attempting to wrest control of the MAGA movement away from President Trump by claiming that he is in fact a corrupt figurehead who is covering up a child sex rape ring. And then you have people on the left who are perfectly willing to say the same thing because they want MAGA to die. And they are joining hands right now. So here's President Trump yesterday being asked about Epstein, and he's obviously annoyed.
No, had nothing to do with it. Only you would think that. That had nothing to do with it.
And there's been an attempt by the administration, by Speaker Johnson, by everybody else, to basically say, fine, transparency, let's try to get as much information as we can. This has refocused the administration away from important things that are happening, which we'll actually get to in a moment, and onto things like, let's go interview Ghislaine Maxwell, who is Jeffrey Epstein's paramour, complicit, sex trafficker, sentenced to 20 years in prison for sex trafficking young girls for the pleasure of her boyfriend and of herself, apparently. Well, on Thursday and Friday, according to the New York Times, Justice Department officials interviewed Maxwell, who's currently serving that 20-year sentence. Her lawyers said she answered questions about a host of people, but it was unclear what information she provided. Todd Blanche, the deputy AG who brokered the meeting, said on Thursday the department will share additional information about what we learned at the appropriate time. She's obviously gaming for a pardon. What she's now attempting to do is say, I know a bunch of people who are not President Trump, who are other people, and I'm going to spill the beans on them. All you have to do is pardon me. Well, Speaker Johnson correctly says, listen, she is a sex criminal and a pervert and a pedophile. She should have a life sentence, not a 20-year sentence.
If you're asking my opinion, I think 20 years was a pittance. I think she should have a life sentence at least. I mean, think of all these unspeakable crimes, and as you noted earlier, probably 1,000 victims. I mean, you know, it's hard to put into words how evil this was, and that she orchestrated it and was a big part of it. At least under the criminal sanction, I think is an unforgivable thing.
And again, there are a bunch of people inside the Republican Party who are saying that she's sort of the key to the whole thing. You're seeing a lot of right-wing influencers saying she's the key to the whole thing. The big problem here is that you do have the possibility that, you know, the convicted sex trafficker, pervert, and liar, that she might be lying about some of this stuff. And so you actually need extraneous evidence in order to prove her allegations, because that's just the way the system works and ought to work. Speaker Johnson says, I certainly hope she's telling the truth, but she has some ulterior motives.
Well, I mean, look, it's a good question. I hope so. I hope that she would want to come clean. We certainly are interested in knowing everything that she knows. And as you'll note, in our House Republican majority, we're working towards that. Chairman Comer and our Oversight Committee has already issued their own subpoena. They want to bring in Ghislaine Maxwell as well. I hope she's telling the truth. She is convicted. She is serving a 20-year sentence for child sex trafficking, and so her character is in some question. But if she wants to come clean now, that would be a great service to the country, and we'd like to know every single bit of information that she has. I certainly know she's telling the truth.
But again, listen, as much transparency as legally possible would be excellent. As much verified information and credible information as legally possible should be released. I mean, this is obviously a matter of significant public interest and has been for, as I say, years and years and years and years at this point. Okay, with that said, there is a politically motivated attempt to damage President Trump that's coming from both the right and the left. Pretending it's not there is just being silly. Obviously, it's there. It is there from a right that disagrees with President Trump on policy and is seeking to undermine his credibility and what he is doing right now in order to wrest control of the Republican Party away from him and leave unscathed other people around him, other members of the administration, for example. Thomas Massie continues to accuse the GOP leadership of hiding something in the Epstein files. Does he really believe that? What does he think is being hidden? I'd love to hear him theorize. What is the thing that he says is being hidden? What, is it Trump personally? Who's doing it? Is it Cash Patel? Is it Dan Bongino? Is it Pam Bondi? Who's doing it? Here was Thomas Massie, who's been, again, joining hands with Ro Khanna, the radical left congressperson from California, to suggest that the administration is engaged in a cover-up.
What is your response to the concern that releasing these files could ultimately hurt the victims, Congressman Massie?
Well, look, that's a straw man. Roe and I carefully crafted this legislation so that the victims' names will be redacted and that no child pornography will be released. So they're hiding behind that. We're trying to get justice for the victims and transparency for America. And so, you know, we've redacted things before. We don't want to hurt the victims. We're doing this for the victims. I think it's just something that they're hiding behind.
And again, Massie, who's they? Who is they? Who's the they who's doing the hiding? Meanwhile, the Democrats are joining hands with Thomas Massie. Democratic Representative Mark Vesey of Texas says that President Trump is hiding something.
Hold on here, Donald Trump is obviously trying to hide something. That's why he's acting so guilty of this. And the other thing that's really disturbing about that is that Maxwell was interviewed outside of prison. There was no reason why she needed to be transported away from a federal lockup when he just could have gone there and met with her and her attorney. And so, yeah, I think that something is really shady here. And just everything around the whole Epstein file, since Trump has found out that he's been in the files in May, has just been 100% shady.
When Republicans find themselves hugging Ro Khanna and Vesey, then they might want to think, what is motivation? Why is that happening? What is the thing that is happening? And here's the thing. There are actual real conspiracies. Again, conspiracies exist. The question is, do you have evidence for those conspiracies? So over the weekend, Dan Bongino, who's the deputy director of the FBI, put out a statement, quote, "Based on my tenure here as the deputy director of the FBI, I've repeatedly relayed to you things that are happening that might not be immediately visible, but they are happening. The director and I are committed to stamping out public corruption and the political weaponization of law enforcement and intelligence operations. It is a priority for us, and what I have learned in the course of our properly predicated and necessary investigations into these aforementioned matters has shocked me down to my core. We cannot run a republic like this. I'll never be the same after learning what I've learned. We are going to conduct these righteous and proper investigations by the book and in accordance with the law. We are going to get to the answers we deserve. As with any investigation, I cannot predict where it will land, but I can promise you an honest and dignified effort at truth. Not my truth or your truth, but the truth. God bless America and all those who defend her. Respectfully, Dan. And what is he talking about right there? Well, I assume what he's talking about is more Russiagate information, more of the intelligence community manufacturing of information surrounding the supposed collusion between Trump and Russia, or Russia wanting Trump to be president. CIA Director John Ratcliffe was on Fox with Maria Bartiromo, and he says there will be an annex to the so-called Durham report, which looked into all of this, coming very soon.
What hasn't come out yet, and what's going to come out, is the underlying intelligence that I have spent the last few months making recommendations about final declassification and sent that to the Department of Justice that will come out in the John Durham report classified annex. And what that intelligence shows, Maria, is that part of this was a Hillary Clinton plan, but part of it was an FBI plan to be an accelerant to that fake Steele dossier, to those fake Russia collusion claims, by pouring oil on the fire, by amplifying the lie and burying the truth of what Hillary Clinton was up to.
Now again, while all of this is going on, President Trump is still winning actual victories, which is why his approval rating remains extremely steady despite all of the conspiracies, actual and conspiracies that, again, are being ramped up by actors who do not like President Trump and are antipathetic to his actual agenda. And meanwhile, there are victories being won by the Trump administration on trade. So, President Trump, as we say, using tariff threats as leverage. Howard Lutnick on Sunday, he said on Fox News Sunday, August 1st is when the tariffs kick in. And in advance of that, people are coming in there making deals, which obviously is true. Here's the Commerce Secretary.
Okay, so no extensions, no more grace periods. August 1st, the tariffs are set. They'll go into place. Customs will start collecting the money, and off we go. Obviously, after August 1st, people can still talk to President Trump. I mean, he's always willing to listen. And between now and then, I think the president's going to talk to a lot of people. Whether they can make him happy is another question, but the president's definitely willing to negotiate and talk.
Well, President Trump over the weekend reached a deal with the EU. There's a lot of worry that there would not be a deal with the EU. According to the Wall Street Journal, he said he reached a trade agreement on Sunday with the EU, avoiding a damaging trade war with the United States, his largest trading partner, and marking his biggest deal so far. Apparently, the United States will set a baseline tariff of 15% for